This is Melissa here. Hi, welcome to the Deaf Hangout. We are speaking to deaf authors today. My name is Melissa Yanks, and I'm a Latino brown-skinned woman with brown hair, gold earrings, a green sweater with a black tank top and a black watch, tattoos, and I'm in front of blinds. I'll turn this over to C3.
Hi, I'm C3. I have short brown hair, white skin, white background with a sweater. It's blue with some stripes on the sleeves as well as in the front of the sweater, which are teal. I'm going to hand it over to Jonas McMillan.
Jonas here. I am a white male with brown beard, brown hair, white wall behind me. I've got a green scarf and a gray t-shirt. And I also have, you can see books on the side and a bookshelf.
Hi, I'm Victoria. I have a white shirt with some phrases on the front that says very Black, very queer, and very proud. And the queer is in rainbow. Plus, I have a screen that's a green screen in the background, black hat, and glasses, and dark brown skin. My name is Victoria.
This is Melissa here. Wow, thank you three for joining. It's so nice that the three of you are all very well respected in the community. You're doing amazing things already with your contribution to education, social media, sports, social justice. And the three of you are also authors for children books, which is amazing. I would love if each of you could comment on what your book titles are and what type of book it is. Jonas?
Hi, everyone. This is Jonas. It's an honor to be with all of you. The title of my book is Monster Hands. It was sold last summer of 2021, and it's going to be distributed in 2024. And I want to talk to you about the process of what it was like to write a book. And I completely agree with acknowledging that all of us are in the community, and it's so important to engage in dialogue in social media and in person. I'm sure we all are thinking the same thing. We want to make a better world and community, and it starts with children and future generations.
Definitely, definitely. Victorica, this is Victorica. Yeah, I think it's important to start as somewhere and able to see these changes are shown through children's books. I just released my book in August, just absolutely beautiful. It sold. And the title of the book is called Swishing. It is a children-centric book, 5 to 9, but honestly, it could apply to all ages. And I'm really looking forward to talking about the experience and the purpose behind it. I have an artist called Sean Richardson, Black illustrator, Black male illustrator, who is amazing.
This is C3 signing. So the book that I wrote is Learn to Sign with Your Baby, illustrated by Joni Antonio, who is deaf. Also, there's a QR code because 50 signs. That book was written and illustrated, but ASL is a visual language. So we needed to incorporate everything in a QR code so you can pull up and see the signs in action. So the person that's signing is Joey Antonio. The illustrator is Brittany Castle, and it was a great team to partner with. And that book represents the deaf community so well because this book was written, these books were written by hearing people back in the day. And it's nice to have deaf people working on these books to really lift it up. And this is written by a deaf person for deaf people who want to learn the language through the community.
This is Melissa. I'm already seeing a huge community response to C3 and Victorica's books. It's a positive response. I've looked at both. They're wonderful books. And it's no doubt, Jonas, that yours is going to be the exact same.
Yes, I know.
The three of you have really pulled up your sleeves and done the work. Now, out of curiosity, growing up, did you feel like you were missing something when you read books as kids? And or you're not quote unquote fixing that, but do you feel like maybe you are fixing that slightly with the books that you have released?
This is Victorica. Yes, I want to give you a little bit of background. I grew up at the School for the Deaf, and I went there when I was 3. So I was there all my life. And I know for you who have been to a school for the deaf, you know what it's like, and you're always behind. So, for example, there's some schools in general, they're doing so much while the deaf schools are 30 years behind. Just this is a generality, but just to give you an example, in the school library, I would get lost in books. I loved books. I loved reading books. I loved everything about them. And I was struggling to find a book that had my identity or wanted to help me understand those pieces. So I remember my teacher showed a book about Helen Keller. Everyone knows Helen Keller, a white deafblind person. And I didn't relate to that book. I didn't relate to that story. And it was good, but I just didn't feel like I related. And I just felt like, I suffered a little bit because there was no representation that matched my identity. Deafblind, Black, queer, those 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a different experience for me. And so I would read books about queer identity, or I wouldn't read any books about Black deaf people or deafblind. And I didn't feel like I connected, which is why I went ahead and I just wrote a book of my own.
This is C3. Growing up, there was a lack of deaf characters. I also didn't understand my deaf identity until I turned 18 and went to college. So growing up, I noticed there was no characters that were similar to me. And during that time, I had the cochlear implant, and I thought maybe I could find some characters who had a cochlear implant. But now I look at all of the books prior to the book I wrote, and I see hearing authors. And I'm seeing a lot of parents like my own who learned through ASL dictionaries, which meant it was word symbolizations. There were no deaf contexts or deaf culture awareness. They were just words. This book includes different ways people can identify the community and the culture and embodying the language. It's not just a language, but it's also embodying culture. And so this lack of awareness, it's more of a hindsight. I understand it more than I did growing up.
This is Jonez. This is an interesting question. When you're talking about a book, in books, I remember growing up, I loved books. And you could ask my parents, my family, did Jonez love books? I don't know, but I remember that feeling, how it would tell you a story. And that story had a huge impact on my ability to reflect on myself and my outlook on the world. And really, I would get a better understanding of what was out there. Even if the book was a real book based in fiction or fantasy, it would allow me to expand on my imagination and think even bigger. And so much of the stories that are passed around in the communities through storytelling or books, generational storytelling in the community, stories that have been passed on through so many years, is a big part. And I kept thinking, I want world experience with those stories too. What does that mean for change and impact? And really naturally, that just led to this. And I had to write. I just had to. That just lit a spark in me. And I just, from that moment, all those experiences growing up just stayed with me.
This is Melissa. Your books are beneficial to anybody from parents learning how to sign to having a different, having representation within your books. Mm-hmm. I think that representation these days is very critical. Having that spark as well and showing that you have that spark, and a lot of kids maybe look at that and say they don't know where to start. Maybe some people are curious about what the process looked like for publishing a book. Did you have writer's block? Did you have challenges? What were they? I want to hear about everything. Give me the juice on your full journey, the process, and getting your book published.
This is C3. I can go ahead and start the conversation. I remember when I first decided I was going to start writing the book was in December when the publishing company and reached out to me. It was almost a year ago because they saw my writing online, and they saw that I was a parent that was making a lot of comments about including sign language in my child's life. They saw that I was deaf. So the publishing company, Penguin Random House, and imprint of PRH, Zeitgeist, they wanted to recruit a deaf author who had already written a book and wanted to become an author, or already written and wanted to become an author. And they saw that I wanted to do that. So this process for me was a non-traditional publishing process. It happened so fast. I only had 2 months to write this book. And I did it because we had a sustaining contract and a timeline where they wanted me to push it out and start publishing it. This was one of their business models that required first-time writers to write really fast. So it was funny because I felt like maybe this is another part of a religious history, but the 40 days, the 40 nights, I felt like that applied to my writing. And I had a child, so I had to write from 10 to 1. And people ask me how I published a book. I wouldn't have the answer now because they reached out to me. Normally you would reach out to a publisher and you would send out queries to these publishing companies and you would have an agent to do that. But I didn't know the process at the time. I got fortunate that I had a quick in and I was able to put out a book. It was truly a dream. And fortunately I didn't have to go through the hard way. And but I do have a lot of respect for those people who go through the traditional way because they earned it. And I just basically just sat back and I got contacted. So I was lucky to have that opportunity because this company, they had the right thing in mind. They wanted to recruit deaf people to change this narrative that's happening with signing with babies and not having it come from a hearing author's point of view.
This is Melissa here. I love that you brought in a deaf illustrator and you brought in different representation. So they recruited the absolute right person for this.
I was nervous. I was wondering, would they listen? Would they even understand? Not just the writing part, but all of it. Because if I put down my name, then right under there, if there's a hearing person on there, maybe I would get blamed for everything. Why wasn't it good enough? And so fortunately, they heard, they listened, they knew all the people that were involved in this book, they would be deaf. And so I'm just glad it worked out.
That's wonderful. I am curious about both of your journeys. This is Victorica here. Wow. Yes, my journey. I enjoy when people ask me what my journey was like to get to publishing. It was a rich experience, a very rich experience. And first of all, I was a master's student in grad school. It was my last semester and COVID-19 hit. At that time, I was a graduate student. So I was so busy that I just didn't think about how things were going. And then as soon as I finished, I realized that I was staying home. COVID lifestyle meant that I had to stay home. And so I did a lot of pondering. There was this hot topic of Black Lives Matter, BLM, that was occurring during that time frame. And I saw a book. It was written by Sean Richardson, a Black deaf man. And it was a lot of illustrations. And I ordered that book and I got it. And I was just absolutely impressed with that artwork. And I envisioned, well, let me start working. I thought I needed 6 months, maybe. This lasted 28 months with life, different factors internally, externally. I got into a PhD program, all these different factors combined, and I finally finished it after 28 months. I reached out to Savory Words Publishing, which is a deaf publishing company ran by deaf people. And I wanted this book to be printed by a deaf company as well. That would be the ultimate model. And it was roughly probably 2 or 3 months of going back and forth, working through the details. It was really nice working with them. But also, I wanted to make sure that my story stayed the same. And then they had to do the perspective of marketing and what the reading would look like. the concept changed. However, the writing stayed the same. The publishing went well, and I was really happy to have that book
Mhm. That's
completely
amazing.
out by a deaf person.
This is Jonas. I'm just inspired by the both of you, just having that team of deaf people on there, and just related to what Victorica just mentioned. I remember that Victorica and I had previously discussed deaf children and what we're going to do and how we're going to transform the system in the future and what's that going to look like. And I remember at the time my partner had lived in Jackson, Mississippi, where Victorica's from. And often I would fly down, I would visit them for while they were there for the 1-year internship. So I flew down for a visit, and then COVID hit. And this was in Victorica's hometown for 3 months. And this is where my writing journey began. And my journey was so different because publishing house and another one, it wasn't the one that I actually published with, but it was another company, had reached out to my agent, and one hearing author who's a big part of the deaf community, an interpreter from Sacramento, had contacted them about a children's book with hearing and deaf children, and everyone was talking about it. They decided, yes, we're going to do this. And we felt, wait, that's not right, because it's a hearing person. They should do it with a deaf person. And they contacted me, and they weren't sure. It was Karen from DC. And the whole process was so complicated. So of course I said, yes, wait, the universe has answered my question. Because at the time I got taught at Gallaudet, and I was thinking, what am I doing here? COVID was just so scary at the time, and it just gave me a little bit of hope to have this opportunity. So I found this opportunity. I started writing, and like Victorica mentioned, I thought it was going to take 4 or 5 months, but it didn't. It took 2.5 years. I started in March of 2020. I ended up selling the book in August 2021, so 1.5 years. And I had to take classes. I had to do the whole gamut. At the end, I realized that I have to tell more stories. The class I took, I remember this professor recommended, they said, if you want to avoid a backlash from the community, this is what you do. Draw animals. And I said, oh, really? And so I said, no, we just need more stories that are visible representations of different communities. Stop thinking that one narrative is going to cut it for everybody. We need more narratives and more stories. So the advice for so many students in the class is, if you don't handle criticism well, then just draw stories. And my thought at the time was, why? We need more stories out there. And so I remember just going for it, and that was my journey.
This is Victorica. I remembered something based on what you said, Jonas. The illustrations, they say, I forget what the research is called, but the research that was done and collected in books across America are predominantly white. And there's all these different races, and Black authors and illustrators are at the very, very end. It's maybe 7th or 8th in line compared to animals that are illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing. And what Jonas mentioned about backlash, I can assimilate with that. When I released that book, I could not sleep for quite a few days.
Really?
I kept second guessing myself, thinking, what will the reaction be? This was such a new concept for the deaf community. Could they handle this book? In general, could they tolerate it? I'm a deaf, blind, queer person, and I thought that it was going to be a challenging response. So I do understand, Jonas and I have spoken about backlash, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, but I did expect negative perceptions and negative backlash, but actually I haven't. And I've been very surprised about that. It seems like the world has changed, but I have not received that.
This is C3. Related to the backlash idea, one big concern was about DSL almost not accepting it because the publishing company wanted to title it Baby Science. That was the old, it's old news. And I looked at them and I said, it was already in their proposal. And they had the right idea. They had a deaf author, but they said, look, this title needs to change. I said, I can't agree with this book and publishing it. I know there's going to be critique on the book. And there were some differing opinions, but in general, the word is the same. This is what adults use. We don't want to diminish the language at all. And so if it was a hard part, and I really stood my ground on them changing the title because I thought to myself, okay, I'm writing a book, and if they turn me down, then will I ever get a chance again? And Random Publishing House, this company is well respected. And so I kept thinking, oh, is this going to work? But at the end of the day, I wanted to save my dignity. And I wanted to make sure that the community was served the right way. And I felt a lot of responsibility in that. And so we went back and forth for 3 weeks, and they had to extend their timeline because of 3-week delay. And I wrote faster. So the burden really fell on my shoulders even more when we were writing. But finally, they ended up changing everything because I asked them, why that title? Why did it take such a long time? Why were we going back and forth for 3 weeks? And they said, really, it was marketing. The biggest Google word search is baby sign language. So if you type it in, that book is going to come up, meaning,
Wow.
right. So a negative aspect of that is hearing people have already wrote books called baby sign language. So their book is going to come up more times than mine will if I change the title. So we went back and forth, and then I thought, wait a minute, the title could have those words, but we can add more words onto that. So learn to sign with your babies. So it's not baby sign language as a noun, but we put it in within the title. So learn to sign with your baby. And that became the title, and it was agreed upon as a solution. And I was so relieved because I felt like also if I had turned that down, would they just say, okay, fine, and maybe hand it off to another hearing author again? So that was such an awkward time. I remember that. And yes, the idea of backlash, when you're new to this, you feel like you have to worry about your image, you have a responsibility to uphold, and it's a big part of the process just to figure out where you stand and where the ownership lies and what you can deal with. So fortunately, everything worked out.
This is Victorica. I'd like to add to what C3 said about the title. I think the hardest part for me was finding a title, the right title. And that actually is what delayed me a little bit because I wanted to make sure that I had an appealing, attractive title. And I absolutely support books sometimes will say something like deaf in the title. And I thought that maybe it was time to frame it in a different manner. To be standard and on equal playing field with all books.
To
So I
normalize
looked
it.
at the story and I really thought about it. I was outside, I went for a walk, and I saw a player at a basketball court, and he just swished the ball, and I thought, that is it. That is absolutely it, and that is where I got swishing.
This is C3 signing. So do you feel like I think that's why people say, wait until you write it and then do the title later. And I think that's definitely true.
This is Jonas. Oftentimes a manuscript, you'll give that to the editor, the agent, and the title, you always have to add a working title or title in the works. I forget exactly what the term is. And it can be flexible, but then often at the end, they will say, this title doesn't work. And the reason why is because of this, or the community has this. And the marketing department has an input on the title. So I feel like there are a lot of moving blocks, constantly moving. And then there's a lot of people in play that I've never even met. And I don't know who's making these decisions or making these inputs. And so it's a very interesting process.
Wow, this is Melissa signing. The biggest takeaway that I've gotten from our recent discussion is the animal books. That's right. I thought that was funny at first, but they were serious, and you're making me look back and think there's so many famous children's books that have
Mhm.
animals. And that's an easy way out to use animals instead of using diverse, authentic representation in people with those stories. I am flabbergasted. So that's definitely something that's taken me back. And you mentioned being smart with marketing and using words in the title, so that way parents would type in something in Google, then you would want them to pull up your book instead of someone else's book written by hearing authors. So it made me think about how even just typing in a title can make things show up in a Google search, and learning about your journey. So while I'm on that topic, and I did see that question that was just added, but I know it was important for you to pick a publishing company or a publisher, the people that you worked with, but can you tell me what was most important for you to choose while working with them? Because I know C3 said you wanted to have authenticity and you wanted to have specific people to work with you, but what was important for all of you, the rest of you, to look for?
Victorica here. What was really important for me is looking at the individual's lives and, well, so for example, my artist, the illustrator, when the illustrator needed a break, whether it was mental health, something of that nature, I said, absolutely, take that break. I want you to have a good sense of readiness when you are working on this. And I want you to feel motivated. I know that as writers and illustrators, we share very similar experiences. Um, Artists have to think about the look and the appearance, and it might change constantly, and it'll go back and forth between the author to the illustrator. Could change 100 times, 150 times before it's perfect. And that's a very tough job for Sean, my illustrator. So I think it's important to have that support for one another. And then when it came to publishing, it was important that the publishing house supported my vision. And I think that was really important. Whoever wants to write or be an illustrator, it's important to have your vision supported and not be influenced of wanting to change your story. Changing your story for the purpose of the reader's attraction is okay, but to change the purpose behind the story is not okay. So I think that what it comes down to is having that proper support.
This is Jonas. I agree with the rest of you. I feel like the ability to interact and empathize with each other. And I think sometimes a publishing company, just like Penguin Random House, they're huge and they can move really quickly. And I have to act like I understand, and I've done this for so many years, but it's easy to get lost and going, wait a minute, this is my first time. And so not even knowing how to do everything because it's all so new is a really big thing. So I'm glad they slowed the process down and said, hey, I'll work with you. I'm going to give you the name, some ideas of some illustrators. And there were 2 deaf people who said, yes, they would do the illustration piece and they could start doing it in 2027. That's when they could start the illustration part. And I was thrown for a loop. I said, okay, I'm going to have to battle with my ethics here because the story's out now. So that means I'm going to have to do more, or I'm going to have to wait until 2027 and knock on wood. I'll still be alive and, I'll still be doing this because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, but it was really tough. And fortunately they worked with me and they provided a solution where deaf people who reached out saying that they were interested, they gave them a mentor, because the biggest factor in all of this was the fact, interesting enough, the illustration part, there's an age group. We agreed on 8 to 10, 5 to 6, 3 to 4, 2 to 1. So those are the age groups that we were targeting. So when you look at the storyboard, so often they'll ask, okay, so this portfolio that you're looking at, which age group is that going to be targeting? So myself as an author, I would say, what does that mean? This is a good illustrator. And they'd say, no, we'd have to look at the psychology behind that. How is a child going to absorb this information? Is there too much details? Is there a lot of color? Are we going to have to minimize that? So again, hats off to all of you who are immersed in the illustration part, because it is an amazing process. It really is.
Victorica here. I wanted to add to what Jonas said. honestly, I can absolutely agree with that. And I got lucky to have a teacher's background. So I know how to write for the appropriate age group and have an understanding of the illustration for the appropriate age group. So that helped me. And it was worth to have that experience of what word choices to use to attract a certain age group. And I realized that I got younger than 5. So 2, 3-year-olds still enjoy that book, but the target was for above 5. So that's how amazing it is on the way that you write can attract a certain age group, and the reflection of what group you attract. What's funny is that during the writing, I started my writing and I realized as I was writing, I was feeling like I wasn't sure if I was there yet. And then I gave it to the editor and they made adjustments, and those adjustments just absolutely impressed me. And it was exactly what I needed to mesh with the right age group.
This is Melissa. You know, it's your content. You just have to modify it to fit the audience. I think it's a beautiful process. And I'm so sad that time is run out, but I do want you to all answer one final question. I'm very curious about getting this question answered from all of you. So do you hope the children out there, the hearing deaf children out there, what do you hope they feel when they read your book?
Victorica here, I can say one thing. Black, deaf, blind, queers exist. We are out there. And what that means is not saying that there's enough representation. There is. And we are represented. And I encourage children to look at that and look at the important topics. For example, talking about intersexuality and what it's like being a Black, deaf, blind student. I think that's really important to have those discussions, and how my life has been impacted. I think that especially within the deaf education environment, there's a lot of topics lacking. And so this book really opens it up to have those discussions. And it's nice that the book has a pre and post discussion that's developed within that book. And it's not just within deaf education, but in general.
This is Melissa. Thank you. Yes. And this is Jonas, talking about feelings, just being comfortable. This book talks about feeling comfortable with approaching fear, and our society is so hardwired to not talk about feelings or vulnerability and exploring what that means and really supporting each other as a community. And that whole story is about that. And a person just asking friends for support and finally overcoming that fear that they have inside. And I hope that's the takeaway of what children get when they read the book, that they can do it. They can overcome that fear.
This is C3 here. This book is obviously the concept of a child with a parent or caregiver. And what I hope comes from this book, and it's based off my own real-time experience that I've had with my own child. It's been amazing. And I'm able to sign with my child. And at 4 months, they've started to express themselves, whereas their peers who don't sign don't really get to communication until about 8 months old. So when there is signing within a family and a child, there is a better connection with ourselves in our own family. And I'm hoping that other deaf children are able to have that connection with their own caregivers.
This is Melissa. Thank you for making a huge impact, more of an impact through your books. And it's amazing. I know these books are going to live on forever. People are going to have these books for many generations to come. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, I enjoyed the discussion.